So dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor, and I welcome you to my session on BSOG 173, which is titled Rethinking Development. So as requested by many of our learners, this session will be recorded by me. I'll share the link with you so that you can prepare effectively for your examination as well. So the topic we are addressing today is environmental perspectives in the context of rethinking development. So this falls under Unit-8 of your study material. So in my previous video on BSOG 173 course introduction, you must have seen the major focus areas with respect to this particular unit, I suppose. So if you haven't watched, please make sure that you go back and check the playlist on BSOG 173 and refer to this video. Okay. So coming back to Unit 8, in this particular unit, we'll discuss environment and its related aspects, the relationship between environment and development, and much more. We'll focus on the key concepts mentioned in your study materials first and foremost, and later we'll do an analysis based on your examination point of view. As you know, your TEE is soon approaching, so it's high time for you to start your preparation, and I suppose this class will aid you in your effective learning with respect to your TEE. So we all know what environment means. We have been learning environmental studies, also known as EVS, EE, or under other names as per the educational stream in which you have studied ever since school. Am I right? So did you enjoy this learning, or did you enjoy this subject, environmental studies? So remember the term environment. Do you have any idea regarding the etymology of this term? By etymology, I am referring to the word origin. Do you have any idea regarding the origin of this term? This very term environment is coined from a foreign term. As we all know, in English language, there are quite many words that are borrowed from foreign languages, say Latin, French, etc. So this particular term environment comes from a French word environner, which means neighborhood. Okay, so what do you mean by environment? We can say that in simple terms, the place, people, things, and nature surrounding any living organism can be considered as environment. So let me take you back to your school days. See, there you should have heard about some specific terms with respect to environment, such as biotic components of environment, abiotic components of environment, etc. Any idea regarding all these terms? I suppose the chances are less. Anyway, I'll help you have a quick brush up of these ideas. What do you mean by biotic components of the environment? Biotic. This very term refers to the world of living organisms. So can you give me a few examples? Let me see whether you know. Make use of your chat box. Biotic components of the environment refers to living organisms. Can we consider plants?
Yes.
What about animals? Yeah, generally we consider plants. Yes, Gobika is right. We consider plants, humans, animals, etc. as the biotic components. So in the chat box, somebody has also mentioned the abiotic components. Okay. Yes, those things falls under the abiotic components. That is, abiotic refers to the world of non-living. Okay. So the examples would include land, and in your textbook it is mentioned. Okay, atmosphere, water, minerals, etc. All these would fall under the abiotic. Okay, the environment is actually the sum total of biotic and abiotic aspects of life. If you look at page number 105 of your course book, the page numbers could differ. So I'll mention the unit number. That is 8.2. What is environment? In that section, it is mentioned abiotic components of the environment, including atmosphere, water, minerals, energy, etc., along with the biotic components of environment, that is organisms, are its main elements. So what happens? This equation or the balance is maintained with respect to the abiotic and biotic factors. So we can say that in this setup, organisms get their life, they grow, they produce, and they also reproduce an appropriate environment, and they adjust to this environment and try to modify it in the process. So this process of reproduction takes place through human activities in the environment. So that is the focus that we are studying here. That is, human beings continuously change aspects related to environment. So environment can be understood in two ways. That is, human-made environment and social environment. We are about to discuss 8.2.1 of Unit 8 of your study material on BSOG 173. Alright, so let's focus our attention towards human-made environment. As I mentioned, human beings constantly interfere in the environmental balance. You and me, along with almost everybody, constantly do something that would ultimately harm the nature. Don't you agree? See, we all need shelter and we all try to build homes. So once we are building our house, aren't we disrupting the ecological balance? Like, we need to cut trees, we need to deforest areas. At times we need to even affect the plant and animal life there. So how many of you are replanting it? Including you and me, most often we forget or we neglect the need of replanting trees or preserving animal life and other things that would affect the environment. So human beings are interacting with and modifying the environment according to their needs and requirements. Very often we become selfish. We focus only on our needs, and who thinks about its impact upon the environment. So this is something that we need to take care of. We must be very conscious regarding the after effects of our actions. So in a way, humankind has been overusing and depleting natural resources. While we make use of all the resources available now, in a way we are kind of using that up. So will we be able to save these resources for our future generations? That is the question. Or most of these resources are depleting in nature as well. These are non-renewable. Okay. So when industrial revolution enabled large-scale production, transportation, information and communication became faster and speedy across the world. Life in cities and urban centers is an example of human-made culture. But the city atmosphere has resulted in a lot of pollution. Even if we check the health conditions of a group of people living in the city areas, most of them would have some difficulty in breathing, or they might have allergic issues or things like that. So this also affects the human condition. Okay. Yes. So this kind of human-made environment results in a lot of health hazards, consumptions or use of the excessive amount of material and energy, leading towards a crisis. And what happens is that such things lead to migration to cities. People living in rural areas would definitely want to move to the cities. May that be because of the availability of education or better facilities. So due to many reasons, they move to cities, and due to overpopulation and exploitation of resources, things like atmospheric imbalance and increased health hazards, pollution, etc. became threats. Population pressure in cities gave rise to the number of pavement dwellers and many more problems. So all these are the issues related to human-made environment. Okay, So now let's move on to social environment, that is 8.2.2. So here in the section what is environment, we already discussed biotic and abiotic aspects which are integral part of human life. Similarly, societal setup and relationship creates social environment. What do you mean by social environment? The way we interact with the society, the cultural or religious or financial norms imposed upon people by the society, all these become part of social environment. So the social environment includes cultural norms, values, and political, economic, and religious institutions. All these institutions play significant role in the social milieu, and they also decide how it utilizes environmental resources for its benefit. Okay, so what do you mean by social norms? See, this refers to the rules or expectations of behavior or thoughts based on shared beliefs within a specific social group. This could be within a religion, it could be within a political group, etc. I hope that is self-explanatory. So in the socio-cultural environment, which is the primary institution of social organization, obviously family. So it is the family which is the primary institution of social organization that performs various functions like socialization, transferring cultural traditions from one generation to another generation. Remember the stories and the historical aspects that our grandparents or somebody from our family must have told us. Okay, so such things get transferred from generations to generations, either orally. Most often such things get transmitted orally. Even reproduction is part of that. So the human made part of environment is culture, and it also determines the social environment and social actions. The economy is another important factor that determines how resources are acquired and used in economic activities. The relationship between development and environment. For that matter, it is quite mandatory to know the clear-cut meaning of this term, development. Development, you should understand, is not purely an economic phenomenon. It has a multi-dimensional nature towards it. It involves reorganization and reorientation of the entire economic, social, cultural, and political system for prosperity, peace, and tranquility. What do you mean by the term tranquility? My literature students would certainly remember Wordsworth and his quote on poetry. What does Wordsworth say about poetry? It is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility. Do you know this term tranquility, the meaning? Yes, exactly, Rinsa, you're right. In a positive sense, development can be defined as the process to improve the quality of life of all organisms with a focus on human life. So this helps in the progress of the nation in a way. That is what we mean by development. So it is associated with several factors. And remember, each factor influence and affects each other. So let me ask you, which are these factors that we are discussing? Factors that would affect development. Obviously environment, a sure answer. Then economic, social, political aspects, etc. Yes. So all these are the things that are very much affected by these. So another relevant point that emphasizes development is related to the political meaning, and you can read about it in your textbook. Material and social poverty are identified as two leading causes of environmental devastation. What do you mean by devastation? Devastation refers to, in Malayalam we say nashamavuva, something like that. Okay, destruction. Similarly, devastation is a such a word is devastation. So one tip that I would give you is that if in case you are not able to understand the meaning of a particular word given in your textbook, make sure that you refer to its meaning. That is the easiest way nowadays, is to just Google and understand. Okay, and another tip would be to write that meaning somewhere near that word in your textbook, so that would take you to have a better understanding whenever you revise your textbook. If at all you do revise, that would be a great thing to do. So that will keep your attention towards it, and you'll be able to remember this word for such a long time. So the degrading quality of environment can be the cause of poverty as well. That is one thing that you need to take care of. That is, material and social poverty are identified as the two causes of environment devastation. However, on the other hand, the degrading quality of environment can be the cause of poverty. Both environment and development can be characterized as interdependent. What do you mean by interdependent? They depend on each other. Development is impossible without a suitable living environment. Hence, the environment cannot be tranquilized and maintained without sustainable development. That is, there won't be a peaceful existence without sustainable development. Alright, so environment is one of the essential decisive factors exerting influence on developmental possibilities. So these are the aspects that let you know the interrelationship between development and environment. That is what we are focusing on. So if we understand development in sustainable development, the quality of the environment and sustainable condition will become one of the key priorities. And the impact of development on the environment need not always be positive. That is one thing that you need to know. It can either be positive or negative. Very often we see some negative impacts also. So let's have a quick discussion regarding the positive and negative impacts. So the construction of smaller water dams, environment-friendly technologies, and developmental initiatives, all such things would be positive aspects. Such an impact of development and its effects will enrich the landscape in a socio-cultural context and bring sustainable use of environment for the present and future generations. So such constructions of small water dams or some environment-friendly technologies, all these are positively aiding the environment and development. Whereas some negative impacts, such as the construction of large-scale transport infrastructure, great water dams, then cities mining of natural resources of raw materials and energy, such things lead to a negative impact of environment. So what happens as a consequence of these activities? Fragmentation of natural habitats, loss of fertile soil, degradation, pollution of the environment, local climate change, and many more consequences happen as a result of this. So if you look at the environment issues in India, most of these issues rose due to the uncontrolled urbanization, industrialization, destruction of forests, massive intensification of agriculture, etc. So the environmental degradation can happen as a result of development. And what are its impacts? This is something that you need to know being a citizen. These are things that you should take care of. You should be having an awareness regarding such things. While you were in school, you might not be in a situation to really understand the meaning of these and study. But now this course is providing you an opportunity to seriously understand the environmental impacts that we are making, knowingly and unknowingly. And we can be better human beings by trying to avoid any negative impact that we make to our nature and environment. So now let's move on to 8.4, which is environmental perspectives. Shall we? Yes, thank you for responding. on to environmental perspectives, we can have two basic perspectives. Basically, classical perspectives and sustainable development perspectives. So, the environment is determined by how we perceive and treat it in our day-to-day life. The perception and perspectives of people on the environment and the relationship with nature are traditionally divided into categories. Do you know how many categories are there? You can look at the textbook and let me know. Let me see if you are actually referring to your textbooks. How many categories are there? Is it 2, 4 or 6? Thank you, Sumaya. It's actually 4. Yes, correct. Very much correct. Oh, there are 4 categories. Make sure that you study this. Okay. From an examination point of view also this is important. So the 4 categories include stewardship, imperialism, romanticism and utilitarianism. So at the very first glance, these terms might seem quite unfamiliar or hard to study, but if you understand its meaning, it will be very easy for you to comprehend and learn for your examination. Okay. So the first category, stewardship. Okay. First of all, you need to understand the meaning of this term, stewardship. It means the job of supervising or taking care of something. In Malayalam, we say Karya Nirvahanam. Okay, that is what is meant by stewardship. So the perspective of stewardship means that humans hold an absolute privilege and responsibility about their environment. It is our duty as human beings to look after all living things and treat them with respect. And now comes the next category, imperialism. Imperialism is quite a familiar term, I suppose. It is the policy of extending the rule or authority over something. Okay, so the imperialists support the view that God has given humans a right to control nature and feel that nature and God are separate. Okay, they believe that God would give them respect if they are subduing the earth and controlling nature. They are of the opinion that they, being human beings, have the right to control nature. So that is what is meant by that category. Moving on to romanticism. So this must be a familiar term. Romanticism. So the students of literature would definitely know this. That is, romanticism is a movement in arts and literature. And when did this originate? It originated in the late 18th century, and there was emphasis on the glory and the beauty of nature and the power of the natural world. Okay, so by the end of the 18th century, a cluster of artists, poets and writers adopted this imperialistic view that nature must be controlled and managed. But instead of observing nature as ugly and dangerous, these romantics became excited about the beauty of nature by treating it just like God. Okay, they believed that nature is beautiful when it is in its purest state. Remember all those pieces of poetry that you must have studied during your school and college days? Remember Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley, etc. They are basically romantic poets, and many of their poems voice such romantic ideals. Okay, so moving on to the next category, that is utilitarianism. Okay, what do you mean by utilitarianism? You must have learned about it at some point of time. Utilitarianism, it is a theory of morality, and it advocates actions that foster happiness and oppose actions that cause unhappiness. Okay, they promote happiness and they do not promote unhappiness. That is the summary of that. Okay, according to them, life is considered happy and cannot be comprehended beyond human feelings. Here, remember, happiness and contentment are the essential things to life. So there are several reasons why trees, plants and the environment are essential to the utilitarian people. That's because they enjoy and use the food chain What do you mean by food chain? You know all these things, right? But yes, and diverse landscapes in which the environment performs their fundamental roles. Utilitarians want to protect and conserve the environment for these reasons as well. Now we are moving on to a very important session, that is 8.4.2 Sustainable Development Perspective. Okay, so we are studying about the two basic perspectives. Firstly, we studied the classical perspective, and now we are moving on to the sustainable development perspective. There will be questions from this session for your examination. So this is one area that you should never leave when you are attempting the TEE based on BSOG 173. But what challenges you is that you will have to remember certain historical facts or pieces of information. So shall we move on to that? Yes. First and foremost, it is very mandatory to know the importance or the meaning of the word sustainable. What do you mean by the term sustainable? You must have heard about sustainable resources. During your school days, you must have studied sustainable resources. Those resources that can be continued for a long period of time. Say solar energy. So sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Yes, Guido is right. Natural gas, solar energy, all such resources are sustainable resources. We'll discuss the conferences, documents and strategies that are prominent in the field of sustainable development. So the first important conference took place in Stockholm, Sweden, okay, in the year 1972. So in 1972, the United Nations Conference on Human Environment took place in Stockholm, Sweden. Why was this Stockholm conference important? The Stockholm conference was historical because environmental problems received formal recognition for the first time at the global level. It was in the Stockholm conference that for the very first time environmental issues got addressed and recognized. Okay, it recognized that environmental problems are global problems and that such problems require international solutions. So will you remember this 1972 Stockholm conference? Then later in the year 1981, the concept of sustainable development appeared for the first time. When did environmental issues got recognized for the first time internationally? In the year 1972 at Stockholm, Sweden conference. Okay, but sustainable development appeared for the first time in 1981. It was mentioned in the title of a key document. What is the title of this document? World Conservation Strategy, Living Resource Conservation for Sustainable Development. Remember, this is a single title. How do you separate using colon? That is, the one part that comes before the colon would be the main title and what comes after the colon would be a subtitle. So dear learners, do remember that this document, World Conservation Strategy, Living Resource Conservation for Sustainable Development, was published by the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN, the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, and UN Environment Program, UNEP. Okay, so we know what happened in 1972. We have studied what happened in 1981. And when we come to 1983, the United Nations set up the World Commission on Environment and Development, WCED. So it was headed by Harlem, the Prime Minister of Norway, and it is an independent body. So what was the objective of this WCED? It was to re-examine the critical environment and development problems on the planet and to formulate realistic proposals to solve these issues. So this body also published a report that is also important. It is titled Our Common Future. and the year of publication is 1987. Why is this report very important? The reason is it presented the first official definition of the concept of sustainable development. Remember, Our Common Future is the document that presented the first official definition of the concept of sustainable development. So there is also another document that got published in the year 1991 by IUCN, UNEP and WWF. That document is titled Caring for the Earth, a Strategy for Sustainable Living. Okay, so what are the key features of this particular document? This document suggested a revised global strategy for conserving nature. It was recognized by this work that global nature conservation requires the participation of local people also. Alright? So that was in 1991, and in 1992 something interesting happened. You must have heard of Rio de Janeiro, right? So representatives of over 150 countries met at Rio for the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, popularly known as the Earth Summit. So the Earth Summit established crucial linkages between environment and development, and it also produced the Earth Charter. This is very important. There might be a question on Agenda 21 and this, okay? So the Earth Charter, which is a code of conduct or plan of action for the 21st century, that is Agenda 21, an interpretation for local issues, the Climate Convention and Biodiversity Convention. Alright, so this is important. There is a chance for you to get a question on this as well. So studying these things would also help you enhance your general knowledge. If at all you are preparing for any competitive examination, this paper based on environment, or there will be often questions based on these summits. Okay, if you are preparing for NT and NET or any other competitive examination, for the first paper, such questions we have seen. Okay, questions regarding sustainable development, very often they are asked. Okay, yes. So, internationally and nationally, the focus is on sustainable development. To assess the progress towards sustainable development, the Rio +5 meeting was held in New York in 1997. So, 1997, there was another meeting. Again, the World Summit on Sustainable Development was held at Johannesburg from 26th August to September 4th, 2002. And this particular conference was known as the Johannesburg Summit, and it is documented as Rio +10. Okay, that is something that you need to be aware of. So remember, this area or this section 8.4.2 titled Sustainable Development Perspective is very important for your general understanding, also for your examination preparation. So you will have to have a clear-cut idea regarding the year of these conferences and what are the basic steps or agenda taken under these conferences. For that matter, I would suggest you to make notes and study. If you are in the habit of note making, you can take a piece of paper, or it would be great if it's a notebook, because if it's a paper, there are chances of losing it. If it is a notebook, you can actually keep it with you. And try writing 1972 Stockholm Conference. First time environment problems were recognized. 1981 Concept of Sustainable Development. Document for World Conservation Strategy. 1987 WCED Report, Our Common Future. 1992 Rio Conference, 1997 World Summit, 2002 Johannesburg, something like that. It would always help you if you take some effort to work towards it. So will you be doing that? Okay. If you don't do that, what happens is that you'll get confused with the dates, and very often we have seen people writing the wrong dates and the wrong title, and even the document names also get confused, and people don't very often write the correct things. Okay, So to avoid that, it would be great if you could remember all these. So shall we move on to 8.4.2.1, which is titled Sustainable Development or Discourse? Yes, as I mentioned, sustainable development is an important area. Okay, very often you get essay questions based on this. Okay, so let's now discuss the roots of the concept of sustainable development. The economic growth model of development adopted by most countries has provided the historical context for the rise of the development environment debate. Okay, so modern technology, factory system of production, rapid industrialization, urbanization, etc. are the quality of these economic growth model of development. So there are consequences of adopting the Western model of development. Okay, very often these are not positive always. There are also negative consequences as a result of this. So it was realized that development conceived only as economic growth was an inadequate notion. Okay, we can't always associate development as economic growth, because economic growth does not necessarily lead to the development of the lower strata of the society. So such a realization caused a shift in development thinking. Eventually what happened? It led to the inclusion of some additional criteria of development. What are these additions? Let's have a look. Such as distributive justice or equality and improvement in the overall quality of life of the masses. Okay, it is realized that the reckless pursuit of industrialization and the use of resource exploitative modern technology for development has resulted in environmental deterioration to such an extent that the very existence of all living species is endangered. Industrialization is not possible without continuous supply of energy and materials from nature. So there was a gradual deterioration of nature. The environmental degradation that has occurred is marked by a large-scale extraction of finite natural resources. Loss of forest covers, extinction of animals and plant species, depletion of the ozone layer, air, water and soil pollution, loss of marine life and biodiversity, etc. have occurred at an alarming rate and have posed a severe threat to the very survival of life on this planet. So due to the strategies adopted for economic growth, environmental degradation and exploitation of natural resources have become global phenomena. Eventually, the increasing awareness of environmental problems has led to the emergence of environmentalism. Yes. So it is important to note that environmentalism has added an essential dimension to the ongoing development debate. It's caused a paradigm shift in our vision of development. It has compelled the intellectuals concerned to think about what is being done to the ecosystem of the planet in the name of development. So the worsening environmental situation has led to the re-examination and reconsidering of the policies, strategies and programs for development. Remember, initially development and environment were seen as distinct entities. They were considered as separate entities, and there was a sharp division between those who supported development over the environment and those who argued for environment over development. What do you mean here is that initially these two were separate entities, and some people supported development and some stood for environment. But eventually there also emerged an increased awareness that human beings need both development and environment. So what happened is that such thinking led to the view that development versus environment is not a dichotomy. This view is well articulated in World Development Report of 1992. So that you need to remember. It is argued in this report that, I quote, economic development and sound environmental management are complementary aspects of the same agenda. Without adequate environmental protection, the development will be undermined. Without development, environmental protection will fail. Income growth will provide the resources for improved environment management. Unquote. Okay. So the concept of sustainable development as defined in the report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, we already studied that, WCED. What's the title? Our Common Future. Remember the year also. So that represents such an attempt to reconcile the goals of development as well as that of environmental protection. Now, let's study the definition, meaning, requirements, policy objectives, and suitable strategy with respect to sustainable development. Tip that I would like to tell you is that at least you remember all these titles. If at all they ask you an essay on sustainable development, you must be knowing that, okay, there has to be definition, meaning, requirements, policy objectives, suitable strategies, and finally criticisms of the concept of sustainable development. So if you at least remember the basic headings, you can actually recollect from the classes you have listened to or the revision you have done, if at all you do, or else at least if you try to read it, some points you will be able to recollect. So one tip that I would like to give you is that if you are making notes, make notes of the main headings so that you will be able to build on it. Okay, try to mention the keywords and that would help you score well. Moving on to 8.4.2.2, which is titled Sustainable Development, Definition and Meaning, Requirements, Policy Objectives, and Suitable Strategy. So dear learners, remember the definition of the term sustainable development, its meaning, requirements, policy objectives, and suitable strategy as mentioned in the report Our Common Future have been briefly dealt with in your study material. That is, they have defined sustainable development as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. This contains two key concepts. Which are the key concepts? Concept of needs and the idea of limitations. I'll take a minute to explain that. The concept of needs, to which the priority should be given in particular to the essential needs of the world's poor. And secondly, the idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. You just have to understand those 2 points, that's important. Moving on to the requirements. See, there is a constant reference to our common future, that report and necessary features. Even here, this common future is mentioned and it brings out the requirements of sustainable development that is mentioned. It also added that, in essence, sustainable development is a process of change in which exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technological development, and institutional change are all in harmony and enhance both current and future potential to make human needs and aspirations. So that is what is being mentioned. And this is important, that is the policy objectives. So there are 7 objectives mentioned here. So it has been noted that the critical objectives for environment and development policies that follow from the concept of sustainable development include the following 7 objectives. Which are they? First one, reviving growth. Second one, changing the quality of growth. Third one, meeting essential needs for jobs, food, energy, water, and sanitization. And the next one, ensuring a sustainable level of the population. 5. Conserving and enhancing the resource base. 6. Reorienting technology and managing the risk. And finally, merging environment and economics in decision making. You'll have to remember this. You'll have to spend some time to read, understand and memorize the basic policy objectives with respect to sustainable development. Yes. And now, suitable strategies. Why do we need a strategy? The basic purpose is to promote harmony among human beings and also between humanity and nature. So, in the specific context of development and environment, the pursuit of sustainable development requires the following 7 aspects. Which are they? Political system. 2. Economic system. 3. Social system. 4. Production system. 5. Technological system. 6. An international system. I'll explain that. And finally, 7. An administrative system. These are the basic requisites. You'll have to have a detailed understanding of all these. That is, a political system that secures effective citizen participation in decision making. Okay, even the individual should have a say in the decision making. An economic system that can generate surpluses and technical knowledge on a self-reliant and sustained basis. A social system that provides for solutions to the tensions arising from disharmonious development, that is, it must be more productive in nature. A production system reflects the obligation to preserve the ecological base for development. Yes, the ecological base of development should be conserved. A technical system that can search continuously for new solutions, that's also important. An international system that fosters sustainable patterns of trade and finance. That's also important. And finally, an administrative system that should be flexible and it should also have the capacity for self-correction. So this is an important area. As I mentioned, you need to remember or memorize these aspects. It would be great if you could write the numbers in your notebook and study. That might sound very silly, but that would definitely help you for your examination. Yes, or else there are chances for you to forget that. So we are nearing completion with respect to this unit. Another important aspect that you need to know is that there are very many criticisms of the concept of sustainable development. What do you mean by criticism? Very many scholars have studied on these aspects and they have let us know their own perspectives or their own suggestions based on such. There are 4 major categories mentioned in your course book, your study material. So when you are preparing for your examination, you need to know that there are 4 key categories with respect to these criticism, and you need to know what are they or which are they. You need to know the basic title at least. Okay. Only if you know the title will you be able to substantiate your answer. Yes. So firstly, logical contradiction and semantic ambivalence. What do you mean by the term semantic? Semantic refers to word meanings. Okay. Ambivalence. What do you mean by that? In Malayalam we say arthaparamaya avyaktata. Okay. Yeah, that could be. So, a scholar called Ramesh Diwan, and he is the one who remarked that development and sustainability are incompatible with each other. They are contradictory as well. In simple words, sustainability is not development. That is what he argued. So such a view implies that the term development used in any sense inevitably leads to an increase in the level of consumption and also to the exploitation of natural resources. That is, he said that if there is development, there will be exploitation of natural resources. So that is a criticism that came from Ramesh Diwan. So the next criticism is based on its vague and ambiguous nature. William F. Fisher is the one mentioned here. So he mentioned that not only does the term sustainable development mean different things to different persons or group, but its meaning also differs for one set of nations from that of the other. That is, sustainable development, its meaning can change with respect to nations. So that is something that he has explained. When you have time, you better read the explanation given in the textbook as well. So the critique related to the operational substance is what we have next. There the critic mentioned as Anil Agarwal. So what he does is that he asks about the doubts related to the operational substance of the definition of sustainable development. He opines that the world is still waiting for an operational meaning of this concept. And finally, the politics of sustainable development is questioned by K.R. Nair, who looks at the concept of sustainable development as a political instrument. He comments that the cyclical relationship between poverty and environmental degradation has conceptualized in simple terms. That is, the assumption is that as poverty increases, natural environments have degraded, and when environments degrade, the prospects for further livelihood decrease. And environmental degradation generates more poverty, thus accelerating the cycle. He has presented the picture of a cycle, how this affects poverty and how environment degradation and poverty can be connected. So that is what he has mentioned. So these are the 4 criticisms mentioned in your course book with respect to the concept of sustainable development. So in this unit, we discussed the meaning of environment and its relationship between environment and development. We also analyzed the environmental perspective in terms of classical perspective and sustainable development perspectives. So now shall we look at the examination point of view? Take a minute to sum up whatever we have discussed today. So we started off with a discussion regarding environment. Environment consists of both abiotic and biotic components, and we understand that in 2 ways, that is human-made environment and social environment. We discussed the relationship between development and also environment. We studied that they are interdependent. Development is impossible without a suitable living environment. Hence, the environment cannot be tranquilized and maintained without sustainable development. But the impact of development on the environment can be viewed in 2 ways: positive aspects, positive impact, and negative impact. Later, we discussed the environmental perspectives, namely classical perspectives and sustainable development perspectives. Within the classical perspectives, how many categories did we study? We studied 4 categories. Which are they? Stewardship, yes, thank you, imperialism, romanticism, and utilitarianism. Okay. Then, in sustainable development perspective, we discussed the Stockholm Conference that happened in 1972. Later, in 1981, we discussed that the concept of sustainable development appeared with the invention of a key document, that is World Conservation Strategy, Living Resource Conservation for Sustainable Development. And then in 1983, WCED was set up, and this published a report titled Our Common Future in 1987. Another document was there, Caring for the Earth, a Strategy for Sustainable Living. Then in 1992, what happened? 150 countries joined, and the Earth Summit happened. There is the Earth chapter, and this Agenda 21 is also important mention. Rio +5 and Rio +10 in 1997 and 2002. As I mentioned, this is an important area, not just for your BSOG 173 exam preparation, but also for your general understanding, which would help you prepare effectively for the ongoing competitive examinations such as NT and NET exam. This often comes under paper 1, Sustainable Development Perspectives. Yes, later we discuss the discourse of sustainable development, and we studied that the economic growth model of development has provided the historical context for the rise of development environment debate. Initially, development and environment were seen as distinct entities, but gradually there emerged an increased awareness that human beings need both development and environment. Later, we learned about the definition, meaning, requirements, policy objectives, and suitable strategies towards sustainable development. We also looked at criticisms. How many criticisms? 4 basic criticisms based on logical contradiction, semantic ambivalence, vagueness and ambiguousness, then operational substance, and politics of sustainable developments. So these are the things that we looked at today. So that was a quick sum up of what we learned today. So from the TEE perspective, that is from your examination point of view, what do you mean by TEE? Term and examination of IGNOU, okay? Yes. From the examination point of view, you can expect at least 2 to 3 questions from this unit. That is, very often they ask you a question regarding the relationship between development and environment. I'm very sure that after attending the session, most of you will be able to effectively write an answer based on the relationship between development and environment. Will you be able to write? Make your own reading. As I mentioned, you will have to make notes of the important points as well and constantly revise the topic. Nobody will be able to remember everything with a single reading. It will take time for you to comprehend and memorize things. The second important question would be from the environmental perspectives, that is classical perspective. We have 4 categories there, that is important. 8.4.1. Similarly, you can expect an essay on sustainable development. We should start from 8.4.2 and mention all those things that we have discussed here. Try to remember the main titles and the main points. That would certainly help you prepare a framework of your answer if at all you don't remember everything. Okay, that would land you safe with respect to that essay question. And agenda 21, remember that, and that summits and conferences and the documents also you need to. They won't ask you 1-word questions. What is the full form of WCED? They won't probably ask you, but if there happens to be a question regarding that, you should be able to answer that. So you should have a clear understanding of 8.4.2 as well. Okay, is that clear? Previous questions about that, I will make a video of December 2021 question paper, and once you look at that question paper, you'll get an idea regarding the question pattern. Okay, I'll try to upload it before your examination. Okay, so yes, we come to the end of today's session. Today we dealt with the Unit 8. In our next class, we'll deal with Unit 9 of BSOG 173, which is titled Feminist Perspectives. So that's all for today. We'll meet again next day for our next session on feminist perspectives. And thank you everybody.